I am so thankful that we don't have hail now.
Right.
Right? I don't ever want to see hail,
No.
but it is amazing and we don't like it, but it happens.
And we need very fast rising air to get large hailstones. We'll get into that eventually in a few minutes, but I first wanted to do a bit of a recap here of the past few weeks because we're building on the core concepts of meteorology. We talked about buoyancy and upward motion creating different types of clouds last week. So the greater the instability and buoyancy, or that positively or rising air in the atmosphere, that leads to faster rising air, and the deeper the layer of instability in the atmosphere, the taller the clouds can grow. So the upward speed of that rising air would be less than a mile per hour with nimbostratus clouds, so those sheet-like clouds that we saw about a week ago with the steady rain. Then fair weather cumulus clouds like we have today, that rising air is, again, relatively light, so it's not deep convection that forms taller clouds and thunderstorms. So vertical motion is usually quite gentle in the atmosphere. It's kind of in balance between the upward force of the pressure gradient force. That is because of lower pressure aloft, and air wants to go towards those lower pressures, and the downward force of gravity. So it's usually in balance, and we usually don't have too fast of rising air in the atmosphere. But we can get that with convection to achieve those faster upward speeds. A less dense chunk of air will rise freely as long as it's warmer than its surroundings. And an environment where temperatures decrease rapidly with increasing height helps these air parcels or blobs of air to remain positively buoyant longer because it's easier for them to remain warmer than its surroundings as they rise. So what I'm talking about here, I'm going to plot on what we call a sounding or a skew-T graph. And I've simplified it here. So we've got colder temperatures to the left, warmer temperatures to the right, increasing height, and that also means lower pressure higher up in the atmosphere. So we call this a lapse rate, or the rate of decrease in temperatures with increasing height. And the steeper that lapse rate is, the faster our blobs of air are going to rise. So our air parcels are going to continue to rise if they remain warmer than their surrounding environment. They keep accelerating upward, and we call that an unstable environment. So when air is forced to rise initially, and that could be because of convection, because of the heating of the sun, or because of mountains, fronts, or mechanical lift because of convergence, when that air gets that little nudge initially, it can become saturated and form clouds starting at what's called the LCL, or the lifting condensation level. So again, that same plot that I had on the last slide with colder air on the left, warmer air on the right, and increasing height in the atmosphere, so lower pressure aloft. So the environmental dew point and the environmental temperature are plotted here, and when those are closer together, we can get the air to be saturated and for condensation to occur to form clouds. And again, that happens at our LCL, or lifting condensation level. That's where the cloud base is, and then we'll have clouds starting to form above that. So if something keeps forcing those parcels of air to rise, they reach an altitude called the LFC, the level of free convection, where the temperature equals the temperature of the environment, and that means we have a positively buoyant blob of air that's going to continue to rise. So there is no further lifting by an external force needed. That parcel of air is going to continue to rise freely because this orange line, is warmer than the environmental temperature. And again, that starts at the LFC. Finally, our equilibrium level, which is much higher up in the sky, that is going to be when those lines intersect once more and our parcel doesn't want to rise anymore because it becomes cooler than the surrounding air. So between the LFC and the equilibrium level, we have the convective available potential energy area. This is where we have a lot of potential for these parcels of air to rise freely. They're going to accelerate upwards and create for sites like this, which is a supercell thunderstorm. So when we have very fast rotating updrafts within these storms with steeper lapse rates, so that leads to the faster updrafts and more CAPE, that convective available potential energy. So that allows for faster and higher updrafts. And these updrafts are a lot more narrow, and those faster areas of rising air much different compared to those larger scale, more shallow and weaker areas of rising air that we see with widespread precipitation. We're talking about very fast, narrow updrafts within these supercell cumulonimbus clouds. So when we have very fast winds, we can get these raindrops to get up above the freezing level. So now they're forming ice particles. Those ice particles form into hailstones, and when the wind speeds going upwards are fast enough, they can support very large chunks of ice. So the severe limits start at quarter size, 1-inch diameter. We need at least about 50 mile per hour rapidly rising winds, that updraft, to support that size of hailstone. Baseball-sized hail, about 80 mile per hour updraft is required, because within these thunderstorm clouds, those updrafts are pulling the frozen water droplets above and below the freezing level. Each time they go above and below it, they create more ice. So they create these kind of ring layers each time they're swept up. Eventually, though, the weight of the hailstone exceeds the force of the updrafts, and the hailstone falls down to the ground. So it's all about how fast the air is rising in our atmosphere to dictate what kind of clouds we're going to get, and then within the thunderstorm clouds, what type of hail we're going to get, what size.
Okay, we don't want any. That's the type I want, is none.
We don't like the kind that slices in, like you see an onion. All those concentric rings are each one traveling up and down in that cloud. We don't like those kind of storms. They produce a lot of damage.
Yes. Well, we're getting into severe weather season, so
yes,
we want to be weather aware.
Absolutely right.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob.